My name is Sommer Bazuro, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the IPG Health Network. Here to talk to us about the lack of diversity in clinical trials and the cost to society as a result is Dr. Jennifer Miller. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sommer, for having me. I'm excited to talk about this important topic.
So, Jennifer, do you know of any best practices for diversifying clinical trials?
So we're actively studying this question now, thanks to a grant from the FDA OCE Oncology Center for Excellence. So what we did is we conducted a study analyzing demographic representation in pivotal trials for oncology products approved by the FDA over the decade of 2012 to 2021. And what we were trying to do is identify bright spots, trials that were able to adequately represent Black or Latino patients. And what we found is that some sponsors have been able to consistently adequately represent Black or Latino groups over time. And so now we're going in and conducting qualitative studies with those sponsors to understand the factors that enabled their success. And then from that, we'll be able to develop generalizable evidence-based guidance for all sponsors so they can have the same success. But while we are busy developing that evidence-based guidance, FDA and stakeholder guidance is rich with ideas of how we can move the needle for patient representation. Everything from making sure that we're setting those enrollment targets, using epi data, right, not census data, so that we're not underestimating disease burden for some groups, to broadening eligibility criteria and protocols. Another best practice that we need to do is to focus on where our sites are located, right? Moving away from the current model that we have, which is to use sites that are in large academic medical centers in major cities and on the coasts of the U.S. So diversifying geographically across the U.S. and trying to select hotspots, right? Sites where we know diverse patient populations are being treated by a diverse workforce. And lastly, there is recommendations in guidance that we better solicit and engage patients in our trial designs and have them provide feedback to us on trial burden before submitting the protocol for approval, and that we then actively work to reduce any burdens that they have identified, which we know can range from transportation challenges to dependent care challenges to just too many site visit requirements that might be replaceable by hybrid care or decentralized trial models. So I talked a lot, I said a lot and very quickly, but Sommer, maybe you can fill in the gaps and share the best practices that you know of for diversifying clinical trial participation.
You definitely covered a lot of the key points there. And so I'm going to come at it from a communication standpoint, especially a POV that we at IPG Health have. So best practices can be divided into what to do to get diverse patients enrolled and then what to do to have them remain in trial as well. And what's fundamental in getting diverse patients to enroll is understanding who they are, right? So making sure that as clinical trial sponsors, you understand who the patients you're trying to target are, their journey to trial, right? And all the challenges and obstacles that they may face. And also understanding the physicians and where they fit in along that journey, right? What are the opportunities and challenges for both sets of human beings as we're trying to diversify our trial? And to do that in a really data-driven manner and not just to do it in an anecdotal manner. So dealing in generalities or old assumptions, like the old assumption that, for example, Black patients won't want to join my trial because of mistrust issues, or patients in rural settings won't be able to adhere to my trial schedule. That won't work anymore, right? We have new tools. We have studies that showed that when asked in a culturally competent manner, for example, Black patients will participate. If trial designs are flexible or utilize technology such as wearables, logistics can be overcome for rural patients. And then, of course, in order to keep patients in a trial once they're enrolled, we need support for the sites. So nurse navigation for patients with clear and open communication about what to expect would be one of the best practices that I think will be very important in keeping patients in clinical trials. So, Jennifer, what would you say to anyone who thinks, well, diversity in clinical trials will be expensive and that's going to slow down research?
Yeah, so it definitely doesn't slow down research, or at least that's what our recent studies suggested. We heard that a lot, that you wouldn't want to slow access for the many, to get a fair opportunity for the few to enroll in research. So we do a lot of myth busting. So we wanted to get, address that talking point. And so we conducted a study of 82 novel therapeutics approved by the FDA for oncologic indications between 2015 and 2021. And what we found is that FDA oncology approvals had similar clinical development times, regardless of whether their pivotal trials had adequate or inadequate representation of different groups, including women, older adults, and racial and ethnic minoritized patients. So here's a few examples. For women enrolled in trials, the clinical development time was 5.9 years for pivotal trials that adequately represented women versus 5.4 years for clinical trials that inadequately represented women. But the difference that appears to be a few months difference is not statistically significant. And then when you look at older adults, pivotal trials that adequately represented older adults 65 and older took an average of 5.8 years versus 5.9 years for clinical development in trials that inadequately represented older adults. And then for clinical development times for trials that adequately represented Black identifying patients, that length of time was 5.8 years versus 6.1 years for development times with pivotal trials that inadequately represented Black patients. But the important takeaway is that none of these apparent differences were statistically significant. So in other words, there was no slowdown in clinical development time or the length of the trial that was correlated with the diversity of clinical trial enrollment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, for taking the time to speak with us and share your brilliant insights. Thank you to our viewers. Like and subscribe to watch more of our clinical equality sessions featuring academics and clinicians working to create change. Together, we can make clinical trials worth more. Join us. Visit clinicalequality.com.